Majority.
Speaker, I have a very long notice of motion, and I beg to read it. And this motion is on the Kenya-Somalia Maritime Border Boundary Dispute Resolution. Aware that in the year 1924, the Anglo-Italian Treaty delineated the Kenya-Somali boundary with the 29 identifiable boundary pillars, starting from the 3 point with Ethiopia on River Dawa in Mandera County to the Indian Ocean at Ishakami in Lamu County. Acknowledging that 1964 Organization of African Union OAU Resolution 16 subsection 1 urging member states to preserve the colonial boundaries and cognizant that the Federal Republic of Somalia attained independence in 1960 but did not subscribe to the said OAU resolutions, therefore claiming territory beyond its border with Kenya through successive regimes. Further aware that Article 3, Paragraph 3 and 4 of the Charter establishing the African Unity provide that African states unanimously through the African Union resolve to respect the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of each state and for the inalienable right to independent existence, and further by peaceful settlement of the disputes by negotiation, mediation, conciliation, or arbitration. Cognizant that the Federal Republic of Somalia's rejection of the OAU and AU decision on boundaries was in furtherance of its expansionist ideology of the time and of achieving a greater Somalia, and it is engineering of irredeemable in Kenya's northeastern province, and hence the shifter war of 1963 to 1967. Recalling that the settlement of the war was acceptance of the Federal Republic of Somalia to recognize the Republic of Kenya's territorial boundary by way of the Arusha Accord, signed by the then Somali Prime Minister, Mohamed Igal, and further that his successor, President General Siad Barre, subsequently rejected the accord, leading to the deterioration of relations between the Republic of Kenya and the Federal Republic of Somalia. Further recalling that President Siad Barre denounced territorial claims of the Republic of Kenya through a declaration at the 1981 OAU Head of State Summit, and leading to the normalization of the relationship between the two nations. Cognizant that the current dispute regards the establishment of the coastal states maritime zones in accordance with the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which both countries became parties to in 1982, which allows coastal states to establish an exclusive economic zones of the 200 nautical miles and a potential continental shelf of up to 350 nautical miles. Cognizant further that the Republic of Kenya proclaimed her maritime zones, including the maritime boundary in 1979 and the United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea was still under negotiation. Further recognizing that in order to domesticate the UN clause, Parliament of Kenya enacted the Maritime Zone Cap 371 laws of Kenya, whose objective is to consolidate the law relating to the territorial waters and continental shelf of the Republic of Kenya. Recalling that in 1991, the Federal Republic of Somalia descended into a civil conflict, resulting in the emergence of terrorist groups and organizations such as the Al-Shabaab and other groups affiliated to international terrorist groups like the Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, ISIS, mass displacement of millions of Somali people, most of whom are hosted in Kenya, piracy on the Western Indian Ocean close to Kenya, and the terrorist attacks in Kenya that has adversely affected our tourism industry, among other negative effects. Concerned that since 1991, the Federal Republic of Somalia has not had an effective government, and hence lack of a peaceful environment for the Republic of Kenya to engage it in negotiation to agree on the demarcation of their maritime boundary in the Indian Ocean. The federal government of Somalia, having not raised any objection with the boundary as established under until 2014, claiming a part of Kenya's maritime zone, by filing a case against Kenya at the International Court of Justice without giving an opportunity to negotiate settlement or any other affirmative dispute resolution mechanism, including negotiations as provided for under the UN maritime law system, of which both the Republic of Kenya and the Federal Republic of Somalia are signatories. Further concerned that the federal government of Somalia has sought professional measures against Kenya for unlawful operation in her maritime territory, and concerning the establishment of a maritime boundary between the two countries in the Indian Ocean, delimiting the territorial sea, the exclusive economic zone, and the continental shelf, including the continental shelf beyond the 200 nautical miles. Concerns further that in November 2018, during the Africa Oil Week in Cape Town, South Africa, Somalia informed that it was in the process of mapping its offshore oil blocks, preparing to offer the blocks for auction, and on the 7th of February 2019, Somalia hosted the Oil and Gas Conference in London and received the plan to offer for auction of oil blocks 230, 231, 232, and 233. And 233 that are within the Kenyan maritime zones, and that the Federal Republic of Somalia anticipates that the signing of the final production sharing agreement by the winning bidders will be on 9th of December 2019 with the effective date of 1st January 2020. Considering that the determination of the case will be made in September 2019 and Kenya is exposed to irregular losing up to 26% of its exclusive economic zone and 85% of the continental shelf and access to international waters, further considering that the possible delimitation of the maritime boundary on the basis of a quadrant principle sought by the Republic of Somalia will have the effect of extending its territory by up to 50 miles from the Kenyan tourism resorts in Lamu and the adjacent islands, including the strategic Lamu port, therefore threatening to expose Kenya to further terrorist attacks and long-term insecurity. Cognizant that the border dispute between the two countries may hamper current efforts in containing the continuing construction of a border wall between Kenya and Somalia, and that the fight against piracy in Kenya waters and fight against Al-Shabaab in the region. Recognizing the dispute resolution mechanism under the African Union, under the Intergovernmental Authority for Development, IGAD, and the East African Community as the first point of call on such disputes. Now, therefore, this House resolves that the government of the Republic of Kenya now therefore this House resolves that the government of the Republic of Kenya, through its representative, does the following. A, upholds and protects the boundaries of the territory of Kenya unless the people of Kenya resolves by way of referendum to alter the territory of Kenya as contemplated under Article 255, 1B of the Constitution, as read together with the Section 3 of the Treaty Making Ratification Act, number 45 of 2012. So, Mr. Speaker, the Constitution is very clear. Unless 255 1B is implemented, that for you to alter the boundary of Kenya, I'm moving a motion. I'm giving notice.
The Honorable Kaluma, let him finish.
Yes.
He will not be interrupted. I know what you want to do, but just hold your horses. Let him finish. We'll deal with it. The Honorable Leader, proceed.
That for you to alter the boundary of the Republic of Kenya? No, there's a serious point of order.
Honorable members, we will allow the Leader of Majority to complete submission on what he was doing before we were interrupted. Leader of Majority, proceed.
Speaker, I will finish and then you allow me to make a serious comment on this matter, but let me finish. Because this is a very serious motion concerning the people of Kenya. So let me first finish. That this House resolves that the government of the Republic of Kenya upholds and protects the boundaries of the territory of Kenya unless the people of Kenya resolves by way of a referendum to alter the territory of Kenya as contemplated under Article 255, 1B of the Constitution, as read together with Section 3, subsection 3 of the Treaty Making and Ratification Act number 45 of 2012. 2, by taking urgent steps to implement in full the provisions of the Maritime Zones Act Caps 371 with regard to the delimitation of the northern boundary of the exclusive economic zones with the Federal Republic of Somalia through the agreement as envisaged by the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. 3, as first and most preferred option, engage the Federal Republic of Somalia to resolve the boundary dispute for the benefit of both countries and the region through diplomacy and dispute resolution mechanism available under the African Union, under IGAD, and under the East African Community. And lastly, express to the United Nations the Republic of Kenya's protest against the assertion of jurisdiction by the International Court of Justice over the maritime boundary conflict between the Federal Republic of Somalia and the Republic of Kenya, noting Kenya's express reservation to the jurisdiction made in 1965 and the provision of the Kenya Maritime Zone Act to delimit the maritime boundary through agreement as envisaged by the United Nations Convention Law of the Sea. And finally, explore other lawful and constitutional mechanisms for protecting the territory of the Republic, including deploying the Kenya Defense Forces to subject boundary to undertake responsibility of promoting the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Republic as contemplated under Article 241(3) of the Constitution.
Order number 7, questions and statements.
The Leader of Minority.
Mr. Speaker, first of all, I want to make a correction. Mr. Speaker, you know, when a lie is repeated many times, it may appear as the truth. Mr. Speaker, I've just heard the Leader of Majority the leader of majority say that Honorable Kaluma is grandson of Akuku Danger. I want to put it right that Akuku Danger comes from Kanyamua, Kulogi Ward, in Dewa constituency, and up to his death, he was residing at a place called Aurachudu, which is in Kuabwai. And as you know, Mr. Speaker, you may not know my mother comes from Kanyamua, and I know all the descendants of Akuku Danger, and Kaluma is not one of them. Actually, Kaluma has been masquerading as Akuku Danger's descendant, which is not. So, Mr. Speaker, I want that correction to be on record because it has been mentioned many times, and I know Kaluma is not related to Akuku Danger because he's not related to me. If he was related to Akuku Danger, he would be related to me. But, Mr. Speaker, finally, I think, Mr. Speaker, something that I would request the chair to be alive to is that I think we have been deteriorating as a house in terms of discipline. In terms of even, look, the issue of even a dress code previously used not to be an issue. Members of parliament knew how to dress and how to come to the chamber. Mr. Speaker, it has moved a step further where one time I saw a honorable member carrying almost what would be described as a bag. Not the ladies' bag that we are used to and which we allowed, something like a rucksack. So, Mr. Speaker, today, again now, we are seeing something so unique that I don't think has happened in any parliament. Mr. Speaker, let us hold this house with the dignity that it deserves. We may want to create drama, but I don't think members of parliament at this time need this kind of publicity, especially when you read what is in the front page of Nation, which I'm sure, although we are still gathering facts, but is so misplaced and is presenting parliament in bad light for no reason. Then you come and do something like what my honorable member from Kwale has done. I think it is a shame, and as the chairman of Orange Democratic Movement Party, I will talk to her to try to counsel her and understand that that drama was not necessary. Thank you.
Very well, the honorable leader of minority, I was giving you the opportunity to speak because the motion that has been proposed by the leader of majority is jointly sponsored by you. That is the rubric under which I was giving you an opportunity to speak. But well spoken, very well. Honorable members, the chair of finance, the Honorable Kaluma, this house is a house of rules. The Honorable Kaluma, resume your seat. The Honorable Kaluma, resume your seat. We've heard sufficient. We have dealt with that matter sufficiently. Honorable members, later on in the course of the day of this morning session, we shall have a notice of motion from the chair of Finance and National Planning Committee. He'll be moving a notice of motion. So prepare for that. He will? Yes, he will lay a paper and also move a notice of motion. Let's proceed. Let's move to the next order of business.
Order number 7, questions and statements.
Order. The first question will be by the Honorable Peter Kaluma.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker, for allowing me to ask question number 333 of 2019. Mr. Speaker, the question is directed to the Cabinet Secretary for Education. Number 1, what are the reasons for delays in elevating and granting Tomboya University College in Homa Bay County a full university charter? Number 2, when will the University College be elevated and granted a charter in line with the ministry's previous undertakings to do so? I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Very well. That question will be responded to before the Departmental Committee on Education and Research. The next question is by the Honorable John Oro Oyoka.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to ask question number 366 of 2019, directed to the Cabinet Secretary for Lands and Fiscal Planning. Could the Cabinet Secretary confirm that the State Department for Public Works has been occupying, been illegally occupying the Suneka Sports Ground in the Bonjari constituency for the last 40 years? When is the said State Department expected to vacate the ground to pave way for renovation and subsequent use by the public? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
That question will be responded to before the Departmental Committee on Lands. The next one is by the Honorable Moses Malulu Injendi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before I raise my question, Mr. Speaker, I would like to bring to your attention that these 4 gadgets that we use here are not working. When you place in your password, instead of the password coming on or this other one, Mr. Speaker, the letters get mixing up. This just to your attention, Mr. Speaker.
The Honorable Injendi, you are saying there's a technical problem with
yes,
with the gadgets there?
Yeah, these 4. These 4.
Very well. It is noted. Please, noted, the Honorable Injendi.
I ask question number 367 to the Cabinet Secretary for Interior and Coordination of National Government. When will the ministry appoint substantive officers to administrative units? Mohoyo, Kovasali, Bunoko, Endolusia, Timbeto, Shivagala, Mundoli, and Buhakunga sublocations, and Inguvuli, Ikoli, Chevoso, Shamberere, and the Shikutse locations in Kakamega North sub-county, which were published via Gazette Notice number 5853 of 21st June 2017 and operationalized in 2018. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
That question will be responded to before the Departmental Committee on Administration and National Security. The next one is by the Honorable Halima Musheke.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I stand to ask question number 368 of 2019, which goes to the Cabinet Secretary for Interior and Coordination of National Government. My question goes, considering that in 2016, during a meeting at the Kirugoya Catholic Church grounds in Kirinyaga County, the ministry, through the then Principal Secretary, stated that Kenya shillings 1.2 billion had been set aside to pay village elders across the country. 1, could the Cabinet Secretary explain the progress in the payments of the village elders? 2, how many village elders are there in the country? Honorable Speaker, this is the second time I'm asking this question. I asked that last year, but it was overtaken by events. And I'm very concerned, Honorable Speaker, because I realized that the 1.2 billion is enough to pay an amount of about 5,000 a month to every village elder in the country.
Honorable Musheke.
Thank you, Honorable
Musheke, you are out of order. The next question is by the Honorable Paul Nzengu. The Honorable Paul Nzengu. Question is deferred. I direct that we move to the next order of business.
Order number 8, the Institute of Directors of Kenya Bill, National Assembly Bill number 3 of 2019. Second reading, question to be put. We have lost no numbers.
Honorable members, I direct that this business be undertaken at such a time as the requisite and quorum numbers will be present. I direct that the question to be put is deferred to such a time. I direct that we move to the next order of business.
Order number 9, the Constitution of Kenya Amendment number 2 Bill, National Assembly Bill number 40 of 2019, first reading. a bill for an act of parliament to amend the Constitution of Kenya. Order number 10, motion, cervical cancer screening services to all women and issuance of HPV vaccines to boys and girls by the national government.
Honorable members, this particular motion had started on the 31st of July, and it has a balance of 2 hours and 9 minutes. I am informed that the member for Kajiado East, the Honorable Peres Tobiko, had a balance of 8 minutes. The Honorable Tobiko, if she's in the house, she may wish to proceed. The Honorable Tobiko not being present, her time lapses, and I therefore will give the next opportunity to the Honorable Pukose, the member for Entebbe.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I stand to support this motion, Mr. Speaker, on cervical cancer screening services to all women and issuance of the HPV vaccine to boys and girls by the national government. Honorable Speaker, issues to do with the health in this country, I think when they were addressed by our Constitution, when it came to issues of implementation, I think we've had a challenge. Because first, even the default of health services were never costed. When it came to whatever remained at the level 6, that is the KNH, other facilities, Moi Teaching and Referral, Spinal, Madare, and the rest, they've always gotten inadequate funding. Honorable Speaker, issues to do with screening, this is where you are able to do maybe a pap smear and be able to screen for our women within this country. It's a service that can be simplified and made accessible to all women within this country. And this is where issues to do with the health and more so universal health care, which is one of the agenda 4, should be put, and I think this is something that when it comes to even the 4 agendas that the President is talking about, healthcare is, I think, is one that is achievable compared with the other 3 issues. Healthcare, universal healthcare is something that is achievable with adequate funding, proper planning, and proper management. Honorable Speaker, when it comes to issues of cancer, these are huge issues that can be only managed by the national government. We've seen even attempts by county governments to put up maybe a cancer center, all this. This is a very complex issue. You need good manpower, you need good facilities, you need good resources. And one of our biggest problems in this country has been even diagnosis. Without early diagnosis or with misdiagnosis, then we end up with the mismanagement of patients. We've had cases in this country where somebody is diagnosed with cancer, put on treatment, and when he gets into better facilities, the diagnosis comes out to be negative, that this patient did not have cancer. Yet you can imagine the resources that person has used. And this we saw in the first instances of where people were doing, we used to, the issues of HIV, where people were misdiagnosed and put on treatment on ARVs and the rest. So, Honorable Speaker, I think this is a very good motion to me and to the country. And I think what needs to be done is that the national government, especially the Ministry of Health, should be able to look at how do we apportion the resources to be able to meet the challenges that faces our country, especially in issues that can be treated with early detection. Cervical cancer is treatable when it is diagnosed early. Survival rate for patients with cervical cancer is very high when detected early and it's managed. Because this is something that there are other associated factors. It is preventable. When you talk of causes that are commonly associated with it, the HPV type 16 and type 18, which constitute about 70% and is sexually transmitted. So when we say we want to prevent both boys and girls, it is sexually transmitted to the HPV from one woman to another or from a man to a woman. And by having vaccines and also by putting in detection methods, screening, pap smears and others, then we can be able to control and give quality to our Kenyans. So with those few remarks, Honorable Speaker, I want to support this motion. Thank you.
Well, the Honorable Nguna Ngusia, member for Mwingi West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir, for the opportunity. Mr. Speaker, I rise to actually support this bill brought by Honorable Tekla for free screening of this cancer, type of cancer in women. Mr. Speaker, sir, I have been always longing to hear from the President and also the stakeholders, the Minister of Health, in declaring cancer as a national disaster. We recall recently what happened just 2 weeks ago, or rather very few days ago. We lost one of the biggest CEO in Africa, actually managing the biggest company. Mr. Speaker, we have buried our colleagues just last week because of this menace of cancer. And that is why anything to do with cancer must be supported with, actually it must be emotional when we are discussing cancer here.
The Honorable Nguna, just give me 1 second to do this, to recognize our students, our children who are in the right place within the National Assembly. I wish to recognize the presence of the following students in the public gallery. Students from Londiani Central Primary School, Kipkelion East Constituency, Kericho County. Students from AIC, Kapket Secondary School, Moiben Constituency, Usiangishu County. Students from Eldoret Educational Resource Center, Ainapkoi, Usiangishu County. Ainapkoi is represented by the Honorable Chepkut, who is properly in the House. Number 4, students from Lubua Primary School, Igembe North, Meru County. Students from Kimarwandi Progressive School, Konoin Constituency, Bomet County. They are welcome to observe the proceedings of the National Assembly.
Thank you.
Proceed, Honorable Siena.
Thank you, Speaker. I was saying this issue of cancer is actually a worldwide issue, and it is high time now each and every country in this world declares cancer as a world disaster, actually. Mr. Speaker, HPV vaccination, the one Tekla is trying to bring here, we know this disease actually, it's very common among the young people, especially our daughters in schools, secondary schools and universities. It would be a very good idea if actually we all subject our kids, or rather our daughters, to this kind of free vaccination, since we know their economic status doesn't actually allow for them to do an expensive exercise. That is why if we actually do at all introduce this issue of free vaccination, it is going to help many people. Mr. Speaker, we recall each member of parliament here, I think, has lost a relative through cancer. Personally, I can't count the number of relatives I've lost. And that is why this issue must be addressed very seriously. We all know that there's been a lot of theories actually regarding what causes cancer. We have been we have been advised not to expose ourselves to extreme sun. We have been advised to eat well. We have been advised to do many things so that we prevent ourselves from getting cancer. However, most of the cases actually, we have been seeing very healthy people, even sportsmen, who doesn't have actually high fat content level in their bodies, actually getting this cancer. And that is why I am here to support this bill. Our women must be subjected to this free vaccine so that we can prevent this. And we are not only talking about women. Everybody must have a right to have free access to cancer screening in this country. I recall last parliament actually set a lot of money to start what we call the cancer centers. But so far, there's no updates. I have not seen a lot of updates. What is happening in this country, despite allocating a lot of money to deal with this issue? Mr. Speaker, that is why even I'm suggesting we introduce a motion of adjournment actually to know the status of the cancer facilities. We have set a lot of money in this country because at the moment there is a lot of confusion. Only Kenyatta National Hospital, you go there, you find queues, a lot of big queues actually for patients who want to access free screening of cancer. But there is no other places. Actually, counties, I don't even think whether counties have got facilities to test cancer. And that is why it is a national disaster. That is why we are calling the government to introduce at the county levels, even if it's not constituency levels, free screening facilities to all types of cancer, not only cervical, but also other cancers like prostate cancer, which is very common to men. And with those few remarks, I support and I'm really looking forward for proper implementation of these bills. Let us not just legislate. Let us fall to ensure that all what we are legislating, it is properly implemented. And that is why I'm calling upon the Committee of Implementation actually to ensure what we pass in the House is fully implemented. With those few remarks, thank you very much. I support.
The Honorable Wachira Kabinga.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I also stand to support this particular motion by Honorable Tekra Tum. And even as I do so, Mr. Speaker, I think we need to urge the Ministry of Health to intensify its effort on documenting curable, preventable, and manageable diseases in this country so that we address them early enough, not just waiting to see what the country went through the last 1 month where we have lost prominent people, Mr. Speaker. The proposal by our honorable member is on the human papilloma virus, which is the main cause of cervical cancer, Mr. Speaker. And the proposal to have early vaccination of this particular virus to boys and girls would go a long way in preventing this particular virus that could manage or enable most of our women to prevent or to get themselves off from the chances of getting cervical cancer, Mr. Speaker. But even as we do so, it is important that we also intensify on creating awareness on some of these diseases, Mr. Speaker, because while this particular virus is one of the causes of cervical cancer, there are many other known and documented reasons why one could get cervical cancer, Mr. Speaker. One of them being having many sexual partners. You are increasing your chances, Mr. Speaker. Smoking is also documented as one of the causes of such a cancer. Having birth control pills, that is the oral contraceptives, over a long period of time can also cause cancer, Mr. Speaker. And also engaging in early sexual contacts. These are things that we may not acquire from the hospital or from the clinic, but we can intensify on creating awareness to our people, and especially at early stages of our educational institutions, Mr. Speaker, so that these topics can be there and would save this country a lot of resources, Mr. Speaker. I therefore urge that even as we look at such motions, where we're looking at prevention and management, we also intensify on creating awareness so that our people may live a healthy and better life, Mr. Speaker. As I support this motion, Mr. Speaker, I recognize that cervical cancer is one of the problems that we have in this country. There are many others. On the side of men, we have the prostate cancer, which also need to be screened at early stages so that we can also manage it, Mr. Speaker, and many other types of cancer. And this is why I'm urging the Ministry of Health to put more effort on documentation of those diseases that we can detect early, manage early, and prevent, so that we also save on resources that would otherwise go into curing, Mr. Speaker, and I believe it is enormous. It is also a high time, Mr. Speaker, that as a country we re-look at our medical services, and especially on the management. We need to do a review on how capable are our counties able to manage health services in the counties, Mr. Speaker. We also need to re-look at the budget that we are attaching to our services, Mr. Speaker, so that even as we look at ways of preventing, ways of reducing, ways of managing, we look at what we have at hand, Mr. Speaker. We have health services as devolved today, Mr. Speaker. We need to ask ourselves or look at the number of the years that we have had these services in the hands of our counties, and ask ourselves whether really our counties have the capacity, or we have capacitated them to be able to manage health services, so that when we talk about early screening of cancer, what are we saying? Do our 47 counties have the capability and capacity to screen to provide screening services for these diseases, Mr. Speaker? Are we as a house providing enough resources in terms of budget to be able to provide for some of these services that we are recommending? There has been many recommendations through such motions in this house, Mr. Speaker. But most of these motions would just be passed, they will be taken out, no implementation, no budget following it, and it goes down to the dustbin, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, for this particular area of health, we need to do it differently. We need to review as a country. We need to relook at what we have given our counties and expected them to do, and ask ourselves if we have given them enough resources and if they have enough capacity to do so. What we are seeing in most of the counties, Mr. Speaker, is a deterioration of health services. And when asked, the counties talk about resources in terms of budget, they talk about incapacity as far as human capacity is concerned. And this is why I'm saying it's a high time, Mr. Speaker, that we remove politics from some of these services. We look at the capacity of our counties to be able to manage health services the way we would want it. And if they are not, Mr. Speaker, it's a high time we now relook at our constitution and centralize health services to be able to provide enough resources, enough budget. We're not blaming the counties on this one, Mr. Speaker. We believe that we have not had enough resources in this particular area, and for us to focus on it is a high time that we now look at the best way to manage it. Move it from the counties, centralize it now, Mr. Speaker. The House here focuses on it, puts more resources so that all the diseases that can be detected at early stages can be detected so that we prevent the menace that we are in, Mr. Speaker. And I want to overemphasize again that we need to relook at creation of our awareness, especially at early stages of our children in school, and especially at the secondary schools, Mr. Speaker, where we are starting to have our children transiting from one stage to another. Some of these areas we're talking about smoking, having many sexual partners, using contraceptives for a long period of time. These are things that our children should know. Our children should know that the moment they start indulging themselves in sexual activities at early stages, they have registered their chances of getting some of these diseases, including the cervical cancer. And for this, I do support Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, but urge that this motion at some stage be amended to include other types of cancer, and I quoted prostate cancer as one of them, to be amended also to also look at the issue of creating awareness in addition to the vaccine that is being proposed for the human papilloma virus, Mr. Speaker. I do support and hope that most of these motions that we discuss, especially on Wednesdays, Mr. Speaker, they are very important motions, but I don't see much of the implementation. For the 2 years I've been around, I've seen many of these motions being discussed, but I've not seen any of them being implemented over that period of 2 years, Mr. Speaker. So I urge the implementation committee to now start getting serious into some of these areas and have some of these motions taken over and taken up with the various ministries for implementation, Mr. Speaker. I thank my colleague, Honorable Tum, for bringing up this motion, and I support, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable members, allow me to recognize in the presence of the Speaker's Gallery students from Chepsir Primary School, Kipkelion East Constituency, Kericho County. I also wish to recognize students from Hekima, Kipsitet Academy, Sowin Sigowet Constituency, Kericho County. They are welcome to observe the proceedings of the National Assembly. We shall have contribution from the Honorable Mboy Robert, member for Kathian.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity. Speaker, I want to begin first by thanking the Honorable Dr. Tekla Tum for coming up with such a timely motion on the debate on screening and possible treatment or prevention of the spread of cervical cancer. This comes at a time when, Mr. Speaker, we've just lost many prominent Kenyans, 3 in particular, and many others that have not been talked about to this issue of cancer. Mr. Speaker, this basically, when this happened, when Kenyans lost prominent leaders to cancer, it made me go around and ask a lot of questions and do a bit of research, Mr. Speaker. So I would be probably contributing from a point of knowledge. And Mr. Speaker, the first thing we need to understand is what this disease is, this cancer. And apparently it is generally the abnormal cells that are divided uncontrollably, and they help to destroy body tissues. And Mr. Speaker, there's over 100 types of cancers in the world, cervical cancer being one of them. Now, cervical cancer is when there is that malignant tumor that grows in the cervix, and basically its effects on the victims are really astronomical. Mr. Speaker, it obviously reduces the quality of life of the patient. Because, Mr. Speaker, one of the things is that, you see, the cervix is located at the lower part of the uterus, the womb. And therefore, obviously, it would complicate the possibility of one being able to conceive or to have children. Mr. Speaker, there is also discomfort or uncomfortable discharges from a woman when they are suffering from this disease. They also suffer from pain, and of course, at the end of the day, it can also lead to death. Mr. Speaker, I've also done a bit of, I've checked a bit of statistics on the issue of cervical cancer and realized that apparently it seems to be the second to the breast cancer as the most common type of cancer that is found in women and affects over 500,000 women worldwide and is frequent in women aged between 35 and 44 years, but very rare in women younger than 20 years. Mr. Speaker, if it is diagnosed early, there is a 90% survival, but 45% cases are normally diagnosed early. If it has spread to other tissues, Mr. Speaker, then the survival rate is only 56%. Now, most interesting part of this, Mr. Speaker, which is really connected to what we are discussing here, is that 90% of deaths occur in low or middle income countries, and Malawi has the highest incidences of cervical cancer. Mr. Speaker, that obviously tells us that as a country, because we fall within that category, we are falling within that category in the world where 90% cases of cervical cancer are prevalent. And so, Mr. Speaker, it is important that as a House we debate these issues with a view to looking for solutions that can help to safeguard the health of our people, the health of our mothers, the health of our daughters. Mr. Speaker, the causes of cancer are not yet 100% known, but majority of the ones that I've found on the internet are smoking, alcohol, obesity, lack of exercise, poor nutrition, some of it is generic, and of course, the HPV virus. Mr. Speaker, the HPV virus apparently seems to have a vaccine. And that is what the doctor, the good doctor, Honorable Dr. Tekla is proposing, that we ensure that as a nation, this vaccine is provided to our boys and girls in this country so that the future of this disease is compromised. Because if more people are vaccinated, if we can eradicate this disease within the youth bracket, then it means in the future the disease will no longer be a problem. Mr. Speaker, the treatment of this cancer is expensive. I've realized that there are 3 ways by which it can be treated. One is the use of medicines, cocktail of medicines in chemotherapy. The other one is the use of high doses of radiation to kill the cancerous cells. And the third one is surgery, which is basically the removal of the affected tissues. Mr. Speaker, when you talk about treatment of cancer, it is one of those things that is affecting the people that we represent in such a big way. Almost every other weekend, Mr. Speaker, we attend functions where we raise money for citizens of this country to go seek treatment, in most cases in India. And Mr. Speaker, I ask myself one question. How come this country boasts of high levels of education, medicine schools that are supposed to be some of the best within the continent? How come we don't seem to have perfected or found out ways by which we can treat these menace? Because, Mr. Speaker, if we could have sorted that problem out, if we had cheap ways of treating, if we had good doctors trained on it, then, Mr. Speaker, we would not have our money being spent in India. We spend a lot of money on air tickets, we spend a lot of money paying doctors, we spend a lot of money buying medicine from Indian hospitals, Mr. Speaker, so that our population can continue to live. And the right of life, you know, is something that is guaranteed. So, Mr. Speaker, I think the Honorable Doctor has come up with a very, very timely intervention for us as a nation to think very clearly about this issue of cancer and to figure out how can we, as a legislative house, be able to propose solutions to this problem. But, Mr. Speaker, as I finish, I want to say that prevention is obviously better than cure. And if we have realized that this virus one of the viruses that basically is prone to the spread of cervical cancer, HPV, if there is a vaccine for it. I don't see even why we as a house should be debating that. Honestly, the Ministry of Health should have taken these upon themselves, should have gone to our schools, should have done public awareness, so that basically Kenyans are made aware of that this is actually one of the viruses that spreads cervical cancer and can be treated, can be prevented, and therefore Kenyans would obviously have no issues. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to propose that as I support this, that screening centers for cervical cancers be increased, vaccination be provided, and over and above that, Mr. Speaker, I wish to say that it is important that a lot of research, further research, is put into this issue of cancer. Because when you open our social media pages, almost every Tom, Dick, and Harry seems to have ideas of what causes cancer. Recently we had, you remember when some supermarkets were found to be selling meat that was being, was laced with chemicals, of course for longevity and also for it to look good. And apparently now that has gone awash, and people are saying that that obviously is one of the causes of cancer. That's why we are dying. A story seems to have leaked out, I don't know how true it is, saying that basically there's a lot of maize that was imported to this country which has aflatoxin a few years ago, and therefore that was consumed, and we are expecting to see more cases of cancer spreading amongst us. I think the government needs to do proper research. Let us use KEMRI, let us use any available state agency that can help to do more research so that we can spread proper awareness to avoid the scare that is going on around. Because right now, Kenyans are probably not going to be able to buy meat from our supermarkets anymore. People are saying that they need to go to butcheries where there are flies, flying all over the meat because they believe that that is safe meat. Unfortunately, they forget that, again, these flies are also spreading germs. So, Mr. Speaker, I think let the government do further research and give us information as a citizens so that we can be able to support them in whatever they come up with. Otherwise, on this motion, I support and I thank the Honorable Doctor. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honorable Mwangi Kadhiru, member for Embakasi Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me say from the onset that I support this motion from that is brought by Tekla Tum. And let's say that the cancer issue, it's a very serious issue, and it's really affecting Kenyans. And I would like to urge my colleague, Tekla Tum, not just to look at a boy and a girl, but look at everyone and include everyone and all types of cancers. And the government should make it free of charge to ensure that in case that it is detected and one is found to be having it at an early stage, I can say that the cost of treatment, it's cheap. I would also like to urge the government and the county governments to work together, ensure that in all the hospitals in our country, they are well equipped with cancer screening machines, and also the medicine to treat the cancer, to ensure that all Kenyans that are living in this country are safe and secure from this disease. Mr. Speaker, we know as a country we are losing a lot of people. People are dying every day because of this killer disease, and if we will not be able to take care of this, Mr. Speaker, it will end up affecting each and everyone. As a nation, I believe it is good the government to invest a lot of money, especially in hospitals, to ensure that all the affected persons are getting good medical care. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Honorable Waruke is interfering with with my contribution, and let's say that I join all my colleagues to support this motion. And when we registrate, we also ensure that we push the government to ensure that if the bills that we have passed here in Parliament are also implemented. Because, Mr. Speaker, if I remember well, we had a motion of brought by Honorable Mohamed Dari saying that we should have in each and every county should have at least a hospital that is able to that is fitted well with cancer machines. And since that motion was passed, we have never implemented it. So we should urge the honorable members and the budget committee to ensure that they provide the budget for what we registrate to ensure that it is implemented. I support this motion, and I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable members, allow me to recognize in the presence of the following students in the public gallery. Students from Dawn Vision Primary School, Mwea constituency, Kirinyaga County. Students from St. John's Academy, Konoin constituency, Bomet County. They are welcome to observe the proceedings of the National Assembly. We shall now have contribution from the Honorable Njiru Mushangi, member for Unyenjes.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity. I want to start by saying that this motion is coming to us at a time when we had a serious conversation in this country about cancer and the causes of and the cause of death by this very disease. Mr. Speaker, I have said in this House before that the greatest gift that a person can have in life is good health. And it is better to be healthy than actually to be wealthy. So I wish to support this motion about providing free screening for cervical cancer to the women of this country, because statistics show that cervical cancer is one type of cancer that is causing a lot of deaths in this country. Mr. Speaker, research has indicated that we can prevent up to 75%. We can prevent up to 75% women from developing cancer in their bodies if screening is done right on time. But unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, it has become extremely difficult for the majority of women, especially those in rural areas, and those that are not in places where they can get information about how to go about screening. So I wish to join the Honorable Member, the Honorable Tekla Tum, in urging the Ministry of Health to offer free screening for cervical cancer so that a majority of women in this country can get a platform to get more information and to be screened of this very deadly disease. And as we do this, Mr. Speaker, it is also important for us to remember that it is not the only type of cancer that is causing death in this country. We have prostate cancer that is so common now in the men, and also the throat cancer. So it is important that the Ministry of Health and even the county governments invest more of their resources in this area of combating this disease. So with those few remarks, Mr. Speaker, I wish to support.
Honorable Guna Gusia, Mwingi West. Why is your name still here? Or you want to speak to the next one? The next one is Honorable Ogutu Abel, member for Bamachoge. That member has left. Honorable Kibuguchi Wamalwa. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I also take this opportunity to thank the mover of this motion for a motion that I think is timely, considering what has happened in this country lately. First of all, Mr. Speaker, cancer of the cervix is now recognized as sexually transmitted disease. It's one of the diseases that we recognize as sexually transmitted because in the majority of the cases with cancer of the cervix, the causative organ is human papilloma virus. So when we tie up the two and say, on one hand, we want to give a vaccine, and on the other hand, we want to do preventive measures or screening, then we are tackling cancer of the cervix from two different angles, and I think that is the appropriate way of going. But just as a reminder to ourselves is cancer of the cervix, as some members have alluded to, is usually associated with very early sexual contact. Very early, usually in the teens. And at that time, once we have this causative organism, which is human papilloma virus, then it causes fundamental changes to the cervix that normally takes many years before the actual invasive cancer is detected. And during that transition period, when those changes are taking place in the cervix, we can be able to detect the changes through screening. We are talking about possibly in the region of 2 decades, because once we have the causative agent at a very early age, about 11 years old, 12 years old, then what happens is the changes take place very, very slowly. And there comes a time when we can be able to pick these changes through screening. For example, what has now been known as precancerous conditions or cervical intraepithelial neoplasia. And that time, if we can pick up the condition at that stage, Mr. Speaker, that is a stage that this condition can be treated 100%. And we have 100% cure rate. But once it gets to the stage where it now becomes frank cancer, where you can be able to see a lesion or a growth on the cervix, then really you are getting to a stage where survival rate is markedly reduced, Mr. Speaker. So I agree and I support this motion. But for us to be able to implement this properly, we must, Mr. Speaker, rethink strongly whether what we are having now in the country in terms of medical care or health care is adequate for our people or not. I am of the view that it was premature. I am of the view that we didn't think through it very well. And I am of the view that we need to, if we are ever going to have a referendum in this country, Mr. Speaker, we need to seriously think about reverting health back to the national government. For us to be able to do massive screening, it's only possible when it is being coordinated from one center, and that is the national government. But if we fragment it into so many different counties, and these counties have priorities that in my view sometimes are upside down, we are not going to succeed very well. So for us to be able to screen, for us to be able to put this into perspective that is going to help our people, I think we have to be courageous enough, and we have been strong enough, and we must be proactive enough to be able to say, time now has come. I think this experiment, Mr. Speaker, has gone on for too long. Experiment of health being handled by counties. And I think it's an experiment that has shown us that it cannot work. So we cannot flog a horse that is already down on the ground. So I think we need to start thinking seriously about, and I will urge my colleagues, the time has come for us to seriously think about reverting health back to the national government, for us to be able to do this. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure where you come from, I'm sure where all members of parliament come from in this country, I think we have seen an upsurge of deaths in this country. We are burying our people much more than what we used to sometimes back. And to me, I think I attribute this to the fact that we devolved health to the counties. And counties, to be very serious and to be, and I think counties themselves need to come up and say they don't have the capacity to handle health. I don't think they have that capacity to handle health. And if we can be able to go that way, then it will be okay. Mr. Speaker, secondly, when His Excellency the President talks about universal health care, universal health care, in my view, will only be possible if, again, health is being handled from one center. Because priorities of the counties are totally different. They can talk about having or wanting to have more resources in terms of finances. And I think that is the argument of the governors and their executives. But you see, the problem is once we give them these resources, then their priorities of where to apply the resources to is completely lost. You find like I said the other day, most counties have now become like employment bureaus, Mr. Speaker, where they are employing more and they spend a lot more money to pay salaries than some of these essential services like health, Mr. Speaker. So, as much as we say yes, we agree, and yes, it's a good idea, and I agree with my sister, Honorable Tekla Tum, but we can only afford, or we can only do this prudently if it is being handled, like I've said, and I'll repeat, if it is being handled from one center, where we have the Ministry of Health coordinating the screening, so that every corner of this country, if we are going to say screening from a certain age, let's say 7 or 8-year-olds, and really that is where we need to start. We start giving them the HPV vaccine. At that age, and it can only be, Mr. Speaker, it can only happen if it is being coordinated from one center, so that all our schools, all the areas, all these girls and boys are being screened at the same time. But, Mr. Speaker, if you find Coast or Mombasa County is doing it, and maybe Vihiga County is not doing it at the same time, and our people move, then we completely lose the essence of the screening, Mr. Speaker. So, as much as, yes, we agree, I still go back and say we must be able now, time has come. If we are going to do, the referendum, time has come for us to revert health back to the national government and let counties deal with other things. In any case, most of them, they can't handle even those other things. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I support.
Yes, before I get to the next speaker, allow me to recognize the speakers gallery. Baria Ruga Primary School from Magatanga constituency, Muranga County. We also have Furaha Primary School, Kipkerion East, Kericho County. And then at the public gallery, we have Kapto Rorgo. I hope I got that correctly. Kapto Rorgo Academy from Konoin constituency, Bomet County. The 3 schools are welcome to watch the proceedings of the National Assembly. Shall we have Honorable Wamaua